if I'm a customer coming to you, Casey, and maybe I'm not looking at doing a full net zero house, and just for those listening, explain, what a net zero passive house. They may hear this term and never understood that. So dive in a little bit on what that actually means.
Yeah, so I'll start with passive. So there's a difference first between a certified passive house. So there's two certifying bodies. So there's Passive House US and Passive House International. But there's a difference between a certified passive house and a passive solar house. So I think a lot of people hear passive house and they say, oh, the house is heated with the sun. Yes, that is a passive solar house, right? That's the concept behind it. But a certified passive house looks at more than that. It does take that into account, but it's ultimately it's focused on energy consumption, heating, cooling, hot water demand, for the most part, heating and cooling. And there's a lot of steps involved. We don't do those calculations in-house. We work with energy modelers, building scientists to work with those calculations. And you need to get a third party to actually certify it if you do decide to go for certification. But the gist of it is you're building an extremely efficient envelope, right? So you're focused on high performing windows and doors, right, that seal well, that have proper solar heat gain coefficient depending on the orientation of where the windows, maybe they're definitely triple glazed, but they might have krypton gas in them versus argon, the typical argon gas. There's going to be different coatings in them. So you get into a little bit more building science on that front. And then you focus also on insulation. And probably the most important part is the air sealing details. So what people don't realize is that air sealing actually plays a bigger factor in a comfort of a home than insulation. If you have a big down jacket and you unzip that jacket and stand in the wind, that jacket is useless, right? So that gives you an idea of what insulation does versus what air sealing does. If you zip that jacket up, well, then now all of a sudden you're warm. So now you can keep the heat in there, but you're also blocking that cold air from coming in. So that's what it focuses on in terms of the passive side of things. And then by doing that, one of the things I get is, well, don't you need your house to breathe? Yes, you need your house to breathe, but you need your house to breathe like you need lungs to breathe, right? You don't want the air to be leaking through your skin necessarily. You want to control that airflow in and out of your home, and that's where ventilation systems come in.
No, I love that you shared that, because what's interesting, I sat through a seminar through advanced framing and, energy efficiency and net zero passive, and one of the main topics they were showing the statistics, and which we don't have here for our listeners, but they were showing how the air sealing is the most important because, and you made that really simple with that analogy, that if you have a huge down jacket, if you have a big jacket, but you unzip it and you're walking around in the winter, right? Everyone can feel that cold air coming in, but if you keep that out, you're already going to set a better tone, right, for your body and for the house itself. And explain a little bit about what net zero is.
Yeah, so net zero, at least, so there's actually a certification now here in Canada. I don't know what the US has, but in Canada, CHBA, Canadian Home Building Association, has a new certification called net zero. And if you don't put solar panels on, it's net zero ready. I'm a fan of it because it's not the extreme of passive, or passive is quite difficult to attain in our climate because of the extremes. Like the passive house that we built for ourselves, our walls were R73.5, right? That just gives you an idea of what we had to do. And we had perfect orientation. So we were taking advantage of the sun. We were blocking the sun in the summer, lighting in the winter, and so forth. I have a presentation on our YouTube channel that's somewhat dry, but it explains, the theories and reality versus living in a passive house. But net zero is kind of a middle ground, right? It doesn't go to that extreme, but it does take some of those same factors into consideration, right? So how the house performs, right? So it's adding more insulation to the minimum building code, but it's more concerned about how much energy you're using and whether or not you can offset that with solar panels. So a net zero home, if it was truly net zero, would produce just as much energy as it consumed. Now, is there a calculation if you're on natural gas? Yes, but once again, you can't offset your natural gas bill with the solar, right? So I always recommend, if you're planning on putting solar panels on, well, it just makes sense to get rid of fossil fuels and just go with electricity, because you'll be able to offset that bill minus the delivery charges or however it works wherever you live, right? Here in Ottawa, I can only speak on with the experience here. Now, there's a difference between a net zero home I do want to touch on too, as well as an off-grid home. So for a net zero home, at least here in Ottawa, the calculations will be set as you kind of want to offset your energy use over the year. But we have those winters, right? We have short days in the winter, we have snow, it covers our solar panels. So the calculation is very different versus somebody who wants to build off-grid, right? So their batteries and solar panels here would be a very different calculation, because now you want to set it for the worst week or the worst day potentially, right? You want to make sure that you have, and you want to take into everything into consideration, including all those tablets, right? If you're a family of 6 and there's 6 computers and 7 TVs and all these things need to be considered, but it's a little bit different when you're just going net zero and you're still staying on the grid.
No, I'm really glad you touched on that, because we're doing a net zero home right now in Scottsdale. And that's one of the things, to explain is that net zero is you use as much energy as you consume, right? Or you're producing as much energy as you consume. But there is a difference between net zero, throughout the year, which is the goal there to balance that throughout the year, as opposed to off grid, because there where you have a lot of snow, how are you factoring in a snow day that's cloudy and gray with no solar, that you can't capture, and how are you storing that energy to sustain you in that cold winter? Whereas we have the opposite here in Phoenix. It can be really hot. So in July, where we don't have monsoons, there's no cloud cover, and we're dealing with 113 degree in our Fahrenheit, very hot summer, every day. How are we making sure that our AC units can run, whether we're using, triple glaze or quad glaze windows, and are we putting overhangs over the windows, that way we can protect from the sun, all these little things. So if I'm a customer coming to KC and I'm thinking, okay, I'm not sure if I want a totally passive house or net zero home, what maybe a couple recommendations you would give, just little things to do to at least start the conversation and have a good base to my house of good quality?
Well, I think there still needs to be a target of some sort, right? You can't design a home if you don't have an energy target or a budget, right? Those are the two biggest things, right? And people, I know, are sometimes afraid to give their contractors a budget because, they're just going to max it out. But at the end of the day, the contractor can't give you the proper guidance if you don't share that. It's the same with the energy performance. If you don't set some sort of baseline, you don't have to necessarily get certification, but you should be working with an energy advisor that they model and set some sort of target, because without that target, we don't know if we should be putting the insulation, how much insulation we putting in the walls, or how much under the slab, or what the windows should perform like, right? So those are all things that are ultimately going to affect the bottom line, because you could even over insulate it for what you need, right? There could be a tipping point, right? Or your windows could be more expensive because maybe you could have reduced the performance of those windows a little bit, right? Or vice versa. Maybe your house isn't as comfortable because you didn't add enough insulation to it, or you didn't go with the windows that you should have gone with, or maybe the overhang wasn't designed properly because the energy modeler wasn't involved, right? So these are all things that we would just have to work through. I'm very much a fan of what's called an IDP, integrated design process. You have your builder, your energy advisor, and your architect and designer all working together with the homeowner from the start. Does everybody need to be involved in every single meeting? No, but they all bring different experience and different knowledge to the project, and all of that together will make for a much better project, and hopefully you won't have to go back to the drawing board later on.